All right, I'm going to go on mute and let Jan start.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Seattle, where we are working to continue to build healthy communities. My name is Jan Levy, and I am your president for this year. As we get started, thank you to Pete Delaney for doing our meeting reporting. And Mary, would you like to introduce some of the guests who are with us?
I sure would. We have from the Hearing, Speech, and Deaf Center, we have Joel Bergsbakken, Kim Scott Olson, and Gina Galloway. We have our guest speakers today, Quinn Lamb, Roy Chang, and Liz Weezar. We have Mariah Graham from the Reading Equity Project, and welcome all.
Thank you all for being with us. So far this month, we have taken the scenic route through education. We started with higher ed, and then we moved on to looking through K through 12 from the state level, funding formulas, legislative debates, and acronyms that require their own glossary. Today, we're going into the trenches. We're hearing from people who don't just talk about education policy, they live it every day, before their coffee, after their coffee, and sometimes in place of coffee, or maybe it's tea. Our panel includes Gwen Lamb, principal at Rising Star Elementary School, where the work of education is happening in real classrooms with real students and real challenges. We're also going to hear from Roy Chang, Executive Director of School Connect Washington, which creates after-school programs that close opportunity gaps for elementary school students and helps make sure that no one falls through the cracks. Finally, we have Liz Weezar, Director of the Southeast Seattle Education Coalition, an advocacy organization for equity and opportunity, especially in communities that often have to fight to be heard. Guiding our conversation is going to be Arik Korman from the League of Education Voters. Arik lives in the policy world of acronyms, but he knows how to translate them into plain English, which I appreciate. Today's panel is about what's working, what's hard, what keeps people up at night, and what gives them hope. Please join me in welcoming our panel. Maybe we'll even learn a new acronym or two. Arik, it's up to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jan. I really appreciate the opportunity to host this panel, and I want to thank our panelists, Liz and Huynh and Roy, for being part of this discussion. As you may know, on February 4th, we heard from higher education this month, and that was Eduardo Peñalver from Seattle University, the president, who's going to be moving to Georgetown University. And then we heard from Washington State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Rakedahl, on February 18th, and heard kind of an overview of where Washington State is in terms of academics and some of the challenges and opportunities that we're facing. And Jan, as you said, today we're going to dig into the trenches a little bit. We'll talk about some high-level issues like educational equity, impact of policies, strategies for advocacy, the role of community and families, and how we measure progress. And essentially, we'll look at some of the challenges that we're facing here in Seattle Public Schools. We'll look at opportunities, strategies that are working, and then we'll talk about how you as Rotarians can get involved if you'd like. So, with that, we'll go ahead and start with introductions. I'll go ahead and introduce myself so you know what brings me to the work. And then I'll call on Liz to go next. And then Liz, you can call on either Huynh or Roy to go next, and we'll just popcorn around. So my name is Arik Korman. I am CEO of League of Education Voters. We are a statewide education advocacy social justice nonprofit. We've been around for 25 years. I just dropped our website information in the chat. And we do primarily policy work. So we work with the state legislature, we work with the governor, we work with state agencies like the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, we work with the State Board of Education, we work with the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, we work with superintendents all across Washington state and get into creating practices so that every student in Washington state can feel safe, supported, and a positive sense of belonging so that they can achieve academically and access the life they choose. We also do a lot of work around student voice because the students are the end user of our education system, and what they say is critically important, and they know what's going on. So I come to this work not only as the CEO of Lev, but I'm also the parent of a 16-year-old who's a junior in Seattle Public Schools who has superpowers, and he also has disabilities. He accesses special education services. He comes from a background of trauma. He identifies as LGBTQ and also identifies as a member of the global majority, or BIPOC. So there's a lot of intersectionality going on with my son, and that makes the work for me very personal. So with that, I'll go ahead and toss it over to Liz. Liz, why don't you share what brings you to this work?
Well, thank you for sharing and following your example. I am also dropping our website in the chat. So as mentioned, my name is Liz Wiesad. I'm the Executive Director of Southeast Seattle Education Coalition, or CSED. We are a nonprofit that brings together various stakeholders, a convener of families, community partners, leaders, anybody who has a care for education. And then we talk about the various policies and systems level analysis that needs to happen to improve our school system. I personally am brought into this work because I am the daughter of Mexican immigrants, and from a very young age understood that the system, depending on your knowledge of it, would result in a different outcome. And so, as the oldest in my family, I often had to be the one translating and kind of guiding us through understanding school systems. And so, upon kind of moving through my career, realizing that this was replicating. There were so many young people who were experiencing the education system in a different way, not because of any lack of capacity, but because a lack of a system adapting to what students need. And so in our work in coalition building, we talk often about cross-sector collaboration, which is why I'm so excited to be here today, because we all need to be pouring into education. And so I'm hoping today's conversation will have you motivated and give you examples as to how to plug in the local Seattle level. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Roy.
Mhm. Thanks, Liz. Hey, everyone. My name is Roy Chang, and I'm the Executive Director of School Connect Washington. And what we do is we provide excellent after-school programs for K through 5 students. We basically take students that are currently below grade level in literacy, below grade level in math. These are students identified by the school, so it's not an open enrollment process. And then enroll them into, with the school and with the parents, enroll them into our programs. And our goal is that when the student graduates 5th grade, they are graduating at or above grade level. So we started, the nonprofit started in 2022. And we've grown from 1 site to now 3 sites, and we serve about 200 students each day. I got into the work because, well, my parents were immigrants from Taiwan, and with a lot of Asians coming over during that period of time, it was this idea that education and the future for your kids was just so intertwined with education to get you out of poverty. And that doesn't really actually work for everyone. Thankfully, my path and my siblings as well went really well. But also being here in Seattle, came here to Seattle maybe about 25 years ago. And I was a pastor at Seattle Chinese Alliance Church on Beacon Hill for 20 some years. And with our community work, that's how I personally learned so much about the public school system. We had a public school right across the street from us, Dearborn Park National School, and learned all about education gaps, opportunity gaps, and so forth. And just saw the need to do something about it. Thanks. Gwen.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Quinn Lam. I am the principal here at Rising Star. This is my 8th year here. And being an educator or being even a principal is never a dream. Being a refugee immigrant, this is something that I would never dream of being, but somehow my path led me here. Having a background of a childhood where both of my brothers were incarcerated, prison to pipeline. I had my own business. I was an international business major, and I had the opportunity to tutor kids who were coming home from school, not having parents around, and somehow they came into my business and I was tutoring them, just shifted my whole kind of pathway into the future, how I could make a difference and change the prison to pipeline as I reflected on my own family. And so I vowed to support and work at a Title I school similar to Rising Star here. I was a teacher for over 13 years prior to becoming an administrator because I wanted to make a bigger difference, and knowing when kids have a strong foundation at the young grade, because I was a kindergarten teacher, I saw success in every student, whether they're coming in with IEPs, with language barriers, all sorts. And so this is where my passion, and I look forward to sharing with you all the challenges and things. And I hope many of you here seem to have roles that you could make a huge difference in schools such as Rising Star. So thank you for inviting me today.
Great. Yeah, again, thank you so much for being here. So we'll go ahead and start with defining the landscape, especially in terms of challenges and barriers to equity. Now, our new principal, or superintendent rather, in Seattle Public Schools is Ben Schuldener. He just started on the 1st of February. And he was recently at a fireside chat that was hosted by the Southeast Seattle Education Coalition. And Liz, I really appreciated that opportunity to get to know Ben a little bit better. And he said that, at least in terms of his perspective, the main levers for creating a better school system are effective teachers, tutoring, and mentoring. And so these are some themes that I think we're going to hear throughout today's discussion. So for the first question, from your perspective, and Liz, why don't you go ahead and kick us off here? What does true educational equity look like in Seattle Public Schools? And what do you see as the most significant systemic barriers preventing its achievement?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I want to make sure that we all kind of understand is that an opportunity gap exists. It persists. It's been here before the pandemic. It was here at some point known as the homework gap, and it has changed names, but the idea is the opportunity gap exists. And one of the framings is that it is students who are at the side of the opportunity gap. In other words, if they don't study hard enough or if they don't do the things that they need to do, then they're not going to succeed. And that is a really harmful narrative because that actually is not true. There is a challenge that needs to be offered to students, but opportunity gaps exist because of systemic barriers that have persisted as a result of inequities in our community. Their system was not built for today's diverse population. In fact, the public education system, I was just at a call before this, was built for young, poor white men. And now we get to 2026 where we're operating under the same system. So when we think about inequities and moving towards an equitable system, we have to address that we're unraveling systemic barriers. So I give you all, for example, graduation as one of those, key numbers to track and to think about. And here in Seattle, the graduation rate is 88%, which is pretty high, right? It sounds great. It sounds good. But the reality is when you look at data that is deaggregated by race and by zip code, you start to see a very different pattern. There are communities of color that are falling behind and actually have not fallen behind, have been continuously kept behind by systematic barriers. And so when we think about what does equity look like now, it is targeted approaches that help center those who haven't had access to opportunity in ways that others have. One of the things that is unique at Seattle Public Schools is that there is an Office of African American Male Achievement, which is a targeted approach to support young Black students in the school district. And this is one of those examples where innovation comes in and really helps meet the moment. And at the same time, just putting a fancy title doesn't actually result in anything, right? And so how do we really reinforce the supports that are needed? and not just put a cool title on it and then move on. The last thing I'll share from my perspective, because I know my panelists have great things to share, is that we can celebrate that there has been great strides. Like, we are in a different place than we once were. We are having more students graduate, but we shouldn't settle for that and conform to it until it's 100%, and then until we really see a shift in our region, right? We know that students might graduate but might not have a post-secondary option. They might not be going to college. They might not have a full wage career track, and that's the part where we really have to pour into it. We should not be celebrating just the graduation, because there's a lot under the surface. And I know folks might speak to it, but literacy, for example, continues to be a challenge in our region and in our country. Math accomplishments. And so all that to say is that we can look at the positive, but we can't just settle in that, oh, 88 is great, and then not move forward with it. So passing it over back to you, Arik, or to any of the panelists.
Yeah, that's great. And when I'd love to talk about what this looks like on the ground. What are some of the barriers that you're seeing? What are some of the challenges to creating an equitable education system in Rising Star? And before you talk about that specifically, would you mind defining the difference between equity and equality, just so we all are on the same page?
Yes. Equity. So, for example, the levy fund. They talk about equality, everybody, every school, because a certain amount of schools don't have levy, right? Every school should have and divided. But does all school need that additional support when they have PTA who can raise hundreds and thousands of dollars, right? Versus a school like Rising Star, for example, has higher needs, large SPED populations of students, large MLL, large social economic status where we qualify for over 50%, like I think what Karen had put in there, why we're Title I school, correct? And so the needs are a lot different. So you can't equally divide probably all those fundings and say it serves the needs of every kid. So equity is in order to meet that, differentiating the different needs. Students with IEP will have a larger need from challenges of academic support, behavior, everything, right? So their needs will be different and higher. So that's where I think the difference equals not equity for all, because of the varying needs of schools based on the population, based on the kids in itself, based on the funding. Does that kind of help clarify that? So that's what the challenges of, for example, with Rising Star, we just have those high needs, and here the new budget comes out, right? Which is given where they're taking away things where our kids actually need more than a school. You can have a number, same population, right? 262 or 300 in school, but you can't divide that fund equally, because the kids in one school in the North End likely has more parents that are well educated, probably have the money for extra tutoring, versus the kids down here who probably come in language barriers, IEP, have a couple years behind in academic. Socioeconomically, they won't have that extra access and opportunities to tutoring or other things to help them reach their academic, right? And so the funding then goes the same. But the kids who need more trauma, like we don't have a counselor, they gave us 0.5, and the other schools too, but the needs are different because we might have a lot more needs because our kids have more trauma-based support that requires a counselor. And so that's what came out with the budget, where we got cut based on the numbers, but not actual breaking down to who are the students that are being served in the school.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you so much. And Roy, you address some of these challenges based on the programming that you have through School Connect Washington. Are there any particular challenges that haven't been named yet? And if so, what would they be? And what do you see as barriers preventing equity?
Yeah, I'll just start with at that neighborhood level. What does educational equity look like? It would basically mean that a child's race, their zip code, their language, or their housing status, that those indicators would no longer predict academic outcomes. So maybe you've heard before in some of the other previous conversations, that only about a third of African Americans are projected to meet third grade reading level proficiency target. This is Seattle Public Schools' own data. And so you'll see statistics like that in Seattle, probably other major American cities as well. And so educational equity would look like the opposite, where 85 to 90% of all student groups are reading proficiently by third grade. And particularly students that I work with, Principal Lamb works with these students that are 1 to 3 years behind, that they're receiving the immediate, structured, the high dosage intervention that they need. There's a lot of parents that I know today. They're all supplementing their students. They're taking their own kids. They go to Korman Learning Center, Sylvan Learning Center, all the private tutors, a lot of things like that. So we just want to have that equitable distribution of the things that the students need to also stay at grade level. And so you talked about what are some of the systemic barriers. So it's just the insufficient structured intervention time for students furthest from education justice. There's not a system for that exists in Seattle right now, apart from just a few nonprofits that are doing it.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and I noticed that some of you are putting questions in the chat, which is great. Mary, I don't know if you're collecting those, but we'll certainly be able to get to questions in about 15 minutes or so. So the next area I'd like to address is strategies. So what are some strategies and initiatives that your organization, whether it's your school, such as Rising Star, or the Southeast Seattle Education Coalition, or School Connect Washington, are pursuing to advocate for greater educational justice? And what kinds of progress have you seen? So Liz, why don't you talk about what CSECs are doing?
So, as mentioned, we're a convener, right? And so part of the strategy of coalition building is getting everybody on a shared understanding of information. Principal Lamb mentioned the levy, for example. That's something that we're highly doing a lot of education around. What is the levy? What does it fund? And where are the advocacy needs around the current levy? As you all may know, Seattle is unique in that we have a Department of Early Learning and Education that is supposed to create funding for enrichment, enhancement, extra programs that support students, youth in in our community. But the reality is that it does come in to support school building necessities as well. And so part of the work that we need to be doing is how do implementation plans, how do the rules that decide where funding goes actually reflect what is the need in community, what is the need in the school buildings, and ultimately accountable to students. And so I say that as an example of the type of work we do. We organize folks in space so that everybody has shared understanding, and then we say, here's where you need to go advocate. Here's the city council members that might require some swaying. Here is the members of the mayor office who are also going to be wrapping around this. And then, of course, where do we place pressure within the school? Is the school board members here or the superintendent needing to be swayed? And so that's just an example of the type of organizing, the type of convening and collaboration work that happens. Again, right now we're responsive to the levy, we're responsive to obviously the arrival of the new superintendent, but I think as a whole, we're also looking at how resources are coming from the state into the local school district. And so thinking about funding at the state level and really that's the place where the issues start. So by the time that we're here at the local level, we're already addressing symptoms rather than changing the actual structures of the system. And so that's the long view of one of the places that we want to really focus around. And then of course there's all the smaller stuff around programs that are working that could be scaled, programs that need to be brought into space, and among many other things. But those are a few of the things that we're currently working on.
Great, great. And at Rising Star Elementary, when you mentioned some of the student populations that you're supporting, what are some strategies, what are some programs that are actually moving the needle? What's working?
So I can give a little background first. So when I came 8 years ago here, this school was really at the bottom of the tier of school of improvement. Only about in the upper 28% of students able to pass their standardized test for 3rd to 5th grade. Students all across grades were probably high 20% meeting at grade level proficient. There's behavior, there's a large homeless populations we're serving, there's high multilingual. So for me is getting to know who are the students and what are their needs and what resources and what skill set our teachers currently here are having. So by looking at that, I had to tackle what do I have within our district's budget that is serving kids and what's working and what's not working. I had to reach out to resources outside. So as a principal, I had to take initiative to work with my PTA to find additional funding. So the first thing is applying for that levy. I knew we only have 12% of the time with the kids here. And if they're a year to 3 or 4 years or 5 years behind, there's no way we can get the students up into speed without extended learning time. I knew that had to be also in place on top of intervention. Because as a whole, imagine a teacher teaching 28, right, students in the classroom or more with varying levels and needs. There's no way that large group instruction is going to meet the needs of all these kids. So I had to find resources and support. That means additional intervention adults to provide either small group instructions or one-to-one, and then figure out what curriculum is working for the kids. We have the required district curriculum, and then finding resources for students like dyslexia or things that are not working. Like I said, like equity does not mean one size fit all curriculum. There are certain kids who learn differently. So I got to figure out those additional resources. So then outside funding is where I had to look into levy, and thank goodness the levy worked out where 6 years we had that plan and additional donors, just like you guys here outside organization, providing those support here that we could run an after school and summer school program, additional extended learning time to help these kids kind of get caught up in some of the gaps in their skills. So as you see, we are, instead of being on the bottom of tier one, we actually move the needle, and not only just gen ed students, regular students in the classroom, students with IEP, students with language barriers, all are moving up, progressing, but they're not at the point where I want over at least 50 who are at proficiency level, which is grade level standards. And that is where you'll see the big standardized tests statewide is requiring our students, in order for them to have a chance to even pass or graduate, they need to be at that grade level standard. So outside additional resources funding for extended learning time period and intervention within the school day has to couple with that in order to, we notice, moving needles, and also coaching support for teachers. Like our superintendent has said, skillful teachers are also important and a factor in moving the needles for our students. So those are the resources that had to take initiative to go out and seek and find and make that movement in our school. But the sad thing is, once you make that movement, you get penalized, because we move out of tier one to tier three. They start cutting some of the support you have based on whatever the weighted budget scale. So there's a plus and a minus with that, right? You're moving the needle, you get penalized, you don't get the resources to sustain the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a need for a policy change so that there isn't this cliff, as it were, so that if you succeed, then you're penalized. That seems a little counterintuitive. So that seems like an advocacy angle for all of us to talk to the school board, potentially talk to the superintendent about. But I'm hearing tutoring, I'm hearing mentoring, and Roy, this goes into your wheelhouse. So
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
levers are working from your perspective?
Yeah. So basically, I would divide it into our advocacy is 3 stages. Proof. Number 1 is proof that after school tutoring works, intervention-based tutoring works. Then coalition, in order to gain momentum with other nonprofit partners to address literacy at a citywide level, and then also looking at policy. And so starting just with proof is to make sure that all of our programs, we have data. We have data related to MAP scores. We can break it out by race, break it out by students furthest from the education justice, a lot of male, female, a lot of different others. So all of that's important that we record, that our students are actually moving from below grade level and moving into grade level. And the second thing is the coalition building. So I just want to say a word of thanks to the Seattle Rotary, because when we showed the sentence movie about 1.5 years ago, maybe 2 years, I want you to know that out of that showing, a literacy coalition was created. Maria Graham, she's our literacy expert here. She's in the meeting today. She's a huge part of that, but it includes Roosevelt Alumni for Racial Reconciliation, the Reading Equity Project, which Maria's over, the Black Child Development Institute, the Breakfast Group, Children's Literacy Project, a few others. So that group is Dr. Felder, maybe a lot of you know Dr. Felder. So that group is pushing, we want to see literacy, grade level reading as a citywide movement. So that was birthed out of the showing of the sentenced movie. So thank you so much for hosting that. That's a huge deal, and there's a lot of work that we're pushing for that. So that coalition part is really big, and then we also getting businesses involved. There's a Seattle Rotary. I don't know if he's here today, but Mark Carosi. So he works for Ernst and Young, and he brought his team to School Connect, one of our sites, and we have probably about maybe 20 different businesses that will come and bring their teams, Amazon, Starbucks, things like that, will come and bring their teams to spend a day tutoring with us. And so we want to get basically every sector of the city to understand what are the needs, what is actually going on ground level in our Seattle Public Schools with the students who need this intervention work the most. So, and then of course at the policy engagement level, we've testified at city councils. Mayor Harrell has come and visited our site we work with Principal Lamb at Rising Star. We're doing together, hosting the largest academic intervention in Seattle. And so we want to continue that path of policy engagement because like Liz says, ultimately, none of us are looking at this at just one school. We're looking at this for the whole Seattle public school system and beyond. And so we know that the funding and the type of leadership that's going to be able to close these gaps is going to be much bigger than just one organization. And the funding has got to be just much bigger than individual donors or even what a city.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Roy. And that tees up our last question before we get to your questions. And Roy, you talked about the role of community and the role of families. And so I'll ask Liz and Hwin the same things. What can families and community do to support the work that you're doing? Where can folks lean in? And Liz, why don't you go ahead, and then Hwin, you can bring us home.
I mean, I definitely want to preface it by saying that there is already a deep care that is happening both from students and families. There is just not enough forums for them to be able to participate in. One of the things that we do at CSEC is really pull decision makers into community space, not just when they're running for office, but once they're in office and once they're accountable to the communities that they're supposed to be representing. So often, and actually pretty frequently, we don't have education experts in office, right? They're experts in other fields, but may not understand education, and yet influence and make core decisions around educational outcomes. And so if there is if there isn't that place for two-way conversation to happen, then we really disconnect in the ways that things are happening. I will mention that specifically for Seattle Public Schools, there was once upon a time a family engagement office and a partnerships office that have both been dismantled because of funding, lacks of funding, and this creates gaps in the way that we are able to support both, school communities, but neighborhoods specifically. And so that for me also feels like another place of advocacy where we have people who want to connect, who want to pour in, but don't actually have the mechanisms to provide that feedback. And it doesn't work, right? Unless we have community co-governance in our schools. And that is not just reserved for people who have students in the school buildings right now. It's reserved for all of us in the region. Again, I'll come back to my earlier point. We all have a stake in a high quality public education system. A high quality public education for Seattle and our region means that we all thrive, but most importantly, our next generations are set to really take us to the next level.
Right. Yeah. They're all our kids. There's no such thing as other people's kids. They're all our kids. All right, Hwin, what can folks do to help your work?
Oh my gosh, key. That's why right on, I said families, our community is something that to me is really important. So that's why I brought in the academic courage team, is making sure our family knows what's going on in the classroom, because our teachers can't do it alone. Nowadays, our kids are even harder. And so we got to be a team. So I meet with not only my teachers, making sure their families are a part of the child's conversation and knowing what they're working on or learning in the school, but our PTA, I meet with them weekly so they know what is happening in our school and what support they could be providing. So my PTA and I are like here. We're like tight here. Our school is open to any families to see and stuff because they need to be the voice and advocacy for our kids. And so community members also, because our teachers can't do this work alone. So I've always had different community members coming in, whether they donate funding, whether it's volunteer hours, tutoring, reading with kids, or advocacy for timing like this levy here, where it plays a big part in supporting equity for our kids. So the voices of our community members pushing for when they know what's happening at the school level, like I think Liz had shared, many of the big decision maker, even our previous boards, do not have education experience. So sometimes decisions they're making has an impact at the building level, but they don't know that. And so we're just kind of swimming here when they're pouring down decisions that are not in the best interest of our kids. So community members being in the schools, knowing what's going on and knowing what support is needed, the advocacy of your voice to make those changes makes a big impact. And because you see the actual work that's happening at the building level, that's why when Roy comes in as a community partner, he goes, oh yeah, this is the need. And so he and I work closely. What additional support, funding, who could we reach out to support the kids? At the end of the day is how can we support each individual kids when they have so varying needs?
If I could just add to that, Eric, if it's okay.
Sure.
I just want to share one story. There's a student, his name's True, African-American male. He entered our program in second grade. He was reading at probably an early first grade level. And so he's been in our program a couple of years now. But anyway, his latest MAP score shows now that he's in the 85th percentile in literacy. So it went from probably in the low teens all the way to the 85th. That's in the country. It's amazing. It's beautiful. Now, in the progress of that happening, right, kind of happened in stages. We had to do some home visits with parents, mom and dad, things like that. In the process, his mother asked if she could join our board because she saw just the work we were doing. She said she wasn't aware of any kind of nonprofit, any type of tutor program that was doing the kind of level of work that we're doing at the community. So she joined our board maybe about a year and a half ago. And then we had another parent, again, an African-American parent. 3 of her children are in our program. She asked to join our board a few months ago. And so our 2 newest board members, besides the founding board members, are parents of the program. So parents their voice is just the strongest, and they are the greatest advocates for how well their student is going to do in the classroom. So having the parent voice plus staff and the principals together is all those things work together to push that child ahead. So it's amazing. And so we volunteers, parent volunteers, we welcome them all to our sites.
Great, great. And I'm going to take 1 minute and 52 seconds to show you a video of what some of this work looks like. And then when that video is done, then we'll go ahead and move to your questions. So I'll go ahead and share my screen very quickly.
And so every morning we kind of put on that mentality. It's like, hey, before this day starts, we start with joy. So that's the huddle. We put our hands in the middle and we say, okay, 1, 2, 3, start with joy.
Start with joy on 3. 1, 2, 3, start with joy.
Rising Rocket Academy is an amazing collaboration between Rising Star Elementary School and School Connect Washington here on Seattle's South Beacon Hill. It is a 5-week summer program running from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. where we are focused on closing academic gaps in both literacy and math. The challenge at Rising Star Elementary School is that less than 30% of the students are reading at grade level, and probably only less than 20% similarly are not passing math. We are almost solidifying negative outcomes for students, and we're solidifying those outcomes at 3rd grade. And that's just unacceptable.
Community partnership is the niche that
schools need.
School Connect Washington, from my perspective, is like that core piece could bring us all together as we strive to make sure our young ones are going to be literate.
Well, I think this is sort of where the magic happens. You see individualized instruction, you see volunteers and teachers and your employees taking the time to teach and love the child and inspire them.
It's the atmosphere that we bring into every one of our classrooms because we are passionate about our students. We want our students to feel the joy and the love that we have, that we want them to succeed academically, and it's infectious.
Okay, well, that's the work that's going on. And with that, we'll go ahead and move to your questions. I want to thank Liz and Huynh and Roy for being part of the panel. This was great. Mary, are you managing the questions?
David Babanik is today, and I'll turn it over to David.
Great, thanks very much. And as the son of a special ed educator, thank you all so much for the work that you're doing. And I know just how powerful the impact can be. So thank you for being here. A number of really good questions in the chat. We're an active group today, so thanks everybody. Starting with John Bridge. A number of years ago, the Seattle Chamber sponsored a program called PIPE, Partners in Public Education, which paired companies with schools for mentorship and tutoring. We touched a little bit on this. Is there some program where our Rotarians compare our members with the schools to help mentor or tutor students? Who would like to, and we talked a little bit about this, but who would like to take that one on?
Well, I don't know if there's a formal process, but I work with the Seattle Rotary, and the Seattle Rotary has generously given us 2 grant cycles, and we want to see as many Rotarians to come to our sites as possible. This summer, of course, we're going to be doing the summer program that was just mentioned in the video. Mark Carosi, who's also a Seattle Rotary member, he works for Ernst & Young. So I've already queued him and his team up to come again this summer. And then I've already talked with Lori and Tatiana, who are the education members, and to having the initial conversation of what can we do to get, like 5 to 10 businesses, 5 to 10 entities from the Seattle Rotary to come do the same thing. And what's great is that we have all the curriculum, Principal Lamb and I, all the curriculum is set. It's a very low barrier to just come in, read with the student, to utilize the curriculum. So it's very easy for volunteers to come do. And we're hoping that those volunteers from the workplaces, that it wouldn't be just a one-time thing. Hopefully they catch the bug, they see how much fun it is and the joy it is, they would come back and be a regular tutor.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And I will reach out and volunteer myself. That's wonderful.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm going to put our website in the chat too.
Okay. Rodney had a question. To what are the schools meeting the needs of gifted students? So a little bit different than some of the other things that we talked about. Yeah, but still an important question. So who would like to take it?
I can speak towards that. To me, a big believer in making sure every school differentiates the learning for every kid. And so that's one of the things that at Rising Star here, I work hard to make sure we get funding to have enough adults to differentiate where they're teaching math, for example, or reading block. The kids are in their small group at their level being differentiated for our students. Advanced learners are highly capable, right? Or those students are getting math where some of the kids who was in second grade that could be doing 5th grade math are getting that differentiation. So that is a big believer of mine. And in science is also another area that we try to also make sure the kids get differentiated and do certain learning projects of their interest, and even reading. Some are able to run their independent reading group based on their level and needs. But I feel it's important that typically schools focus on kind of the lower intervention support, but never in the other end. And so all kids deserve to have a joy and a love in learning rather than being bored because they're at a different level.
And
Thank
if I
you.
could add, students want to be challenged. They want to be provided these opportunities. And one of the observations that we are now aware of is that access to AP courses will vary based on the neighborhood that a student is attending their school in. There is more advanced math available in some of the North End schools and in some of the South End schools, but it's not a matter of can these students rise to the occasion, it's that it's just not available to them. I want to provide as an example, Rainier Beach High School has the International Bachelorette, the IB program. I forget what the full abbreviation, I think it is International Baccalaureate program. And all students are automatically put into the program. A student can opt out of the more advanced curriculum if they choose to, and then it's just your regular high school programming. But all students are provided the access, and that's created an increase in not just graduation, but in ability, in a way of graduating as a worldly student. And so it's an example of when you bring it to them, they will rise to the occasion. And so I think that kind of provides the example of in order to meet the need of gifted students, we cannot just say one subset of the population is gifted and the rest isn't. Though we need to, as Principal Lam said, give targeted, available supports to all kinds of students.
Thank you very much. So Lori asked a question, and I think the statistics were provided to her regarding how many languages are spoken in SPS and how many homeless students there are. Maybe we can contextualize that question a little bit about what are some of the challenges inherent in trying to teach to so many different languages, and how can you support those homeless students? So instead of just the numbers, maybe we can talk about more of the issue.
I mean, I can share at the school level because we have over 20 some languages and we have over 40 to 50 by now students who are homeless that we have been able to identify and support. And so the needs are for example, some of the students, depending on where they're at, some of the kids we get from the homeless shelter where substance for certain parents and their needs are counseling, trauma, kind of support in their SEL, in their behavior. And so the needs are different based on different kids and where that language, for example, the kids need access to somebody to support them with vocabulary, accessing to the content, right? Because we have several kids who are, for example, newcomers coming in. Imagine you coming into China, right? And you're having to learn how to read and write and all that. What is the support in place there? So they do need somebody to kind of support, give access, whether it's technology, whether somebody that could have the language support for them, whether it's in the academic content could be visually supported in building vocabulary. So knowing the kids and the language, all those needs are different, but it does take capacity, manpower, and resources. And so seeing that in place, knowing schools having the number of students that are homeless, right? MKV, they would need a family support worker because those families will need resources, right? And so teachers don't have time to go seek and find, because we had to have funding to pay electric bills for summer, find housing, find transportation, right? They do need counselor support, but not all schools have that full funding and budgeted for those kids in mind. And so those are things to think about when I think they're providing budget and resources for schools is the different needs you're right on. The language, right? There's learning disabilities, the social economic status, and what are the challenges and what are the resources that takes to support those students and their families.
Yeah, if I could add to that, see if I can share my screen a little bit, but let's see if that works. Does that work? Can you see that graph?
Yes.
Is there a graph on your screen? Okay,
there is.
Great. Great. So this, for example, this is the MAP scores for all the students at Daniel Bagley Elementary. It's a Green Lake school up in Green Lake. And the blue dots are all the students that are School Connect Washington in our after school program. And then this is their literacy score. Anything above the 50% line from the x-axis is considered, grade level. The blue dots that are bigger than the others, those are all McKinney-Vento and Spanish-speaking students. So our program is heavily on the McKinney-Vento and Spanish-speaking side. And of course, their English levels are lower because they don't know English. But some of the things that we're doing, we're actually using AI to generate lessons that are conversational English lessons that are at their level. They're translated in both English and Spanish. So that's a big part of doing something that's very geared towards their level, because the school doesn't provide curriculum for them. And then really the whole big supports for this particular community, because of McKinney-Vento, when parents go into kind of crisis mode, whether it might be a rental issue, it might be food, it might be a medical issue that they're hardship that are going through. This is when really the faith community and also the business community comes into play, because that particular after-school program is actually housed in Bethany Community Church, and probably about 40 some volunteers are part of that group. And so we can get the word out to that community if there's a certain need that comes up for our McKinney-Vento families. And then also because they are, most of them are recent immigrants from Central Latin America. So we do those things, the educational programs, the pieces of Know Your Rights and things like that. So those are the ways that we support our most vulnerable families.
Roy, thank you very much. And this is what happens when you have educators come into your meeting. They come like prepared and can find the information to share right as needed. Unfortunately, we are out of time for the questions, and I know we had several more really great questions in the chat. Hopefully we can find a way to get some answers to those. And Karen, I see that you have your hand up. I'm going to turn it back over to Jan. Jan, if we have additional time at the end, maybe we can see what Karen has to say.
Thank you, David. Karen, if it's quick, it's got to be quick, and you are muted.
You're on mute.
It's sort of quick, and it has to do with an idea for Rotary. I started a nonprofit in St. Louis 25 years ago that trains and supports and pays teachers in low-performing schools to go to the homes of their students. When I got to Seattle, I wanted to try the same thing, and I ended up with Principal Lamb at Rising Star Elementary, and I trained the teachers and paid them for an entire year for all the home visits. I think we did 146 home visits. So, and we're going to do more. But my idea is that John Bridge brought up a program that used to be in Seattle that I know nothing about. I've only been here 3.5 years, but there's no reason why Rotary couldn't get together people and start a program that would do this and start a nonprofit. There's enough people in Rotary and enough passion and enough money in the community that it would be a great addition. So I'm going to throw that into the ring and see if anybody
into the ring, and we'll consider it at some point. Not today.
Not today.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay. So first of all, I want to thank Arik, and Quinn, and Roy, and Liz. As a thanks for your participation today, our club's foundation, the Seattle Rotary Service Foundation, has provided 600 servings of healthy produce for those in need through Harvest Against Hunger. Thank you to those of you who've donated to SRSF so that we can provide that support. That produce that we're providing will be given in your names. So thank you. I also want to thank REB Enterprises and Carl Benke for their meeting support. I want to thank Bloodworks Northwest, the Westland Morse Group with Baird Private Wealth Management for their sponsorship support. David, do we have some quick announcements?
We do, and I'll go as quickly as possible. Wednesday, March 4th, we've got our lunch meeting at the WAC with the Seattle Center Foundation Executive Director, Rob Johnson, and that's going to be as we enter the Neighborhoods and Communities Month in March. Wednesday, March 18th, the lunch meeting again at the WAC with Horizon Air CEO, Andy Schneider. That should be very interesting to hear about her vision for the regional carrier. Wednesday, March 25th, it's a doubleheader day, kicking off with our Zoom-only meeting featuring real estate executive Phil Petruzzello, and at 12:30, discussing the re-envisioning of downtown, followed by our March evening social happy hour at the Columbia Tower Club. So if you join us from 5:30 to 7:30, no cost to register. There's a cash bar offered and $10 parking at the Columbia Tower after 5 p.m. Back over to you, and thanks.
Thank you, David. Thank you also for stepping in today as Sergeant at Arms. As I listened to our panel today, I kept thinking about how different school is now from when many of us were students. When we were in school, the biggest stressor might have been a pop quiz or a note sent home to your parents, something that happened in my house frequently. There were no smartphones in our pockets. There was no social media following us home. AI was science fiction, and cyberbullying wasn't even a word. Our biggest tech challenge was wondering whether the film projector was going to jam. Today, kids are navigating a world that is faster, louder, and far more complicated. And the adults in our schools, like those we've heard from today, are navigating it right alongside. I am really happy I'm retired. I am very happy not to be studying for finals, deciphering algebra, which is still a mystery to me, or figuring out how to cut class and not get caught. Thank goodness all of that is behind me. But the stakes haven't changed. Frederick Douglass said it better than anyone. Quote, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." The work happening in our schools, in our classrooms, in our after-school programs, in our community coalitions, it's all about building strong children. Not perfect children, not test score machines, but strong, resilient, capable young people who can navigate a very complicated world. Healthy communities begin in our schools, and strong schools depend on strong communities. I want to thank our panel again for all that you do. Thank you, Arik, for guiding the conversation. And thank you all for joining us. I hope I see you next week at the WAC when we're going to shift our healthy community focus to neighborhoods and communities and hear about what's happening at Seattle Center with Rob Johnson. We are adjourned.